In the South, or excuse me, before we get to the South, in the West, we have these groups of farmers that begin buying products and selling products with the Northerners. And so that's great because that helped to unify these various regions in the country. They were able to work together and live off one of another instead of relying on other countries to get products. Because that was our goal, to become independent from Great Britain and from Europe in general. They talk about the invention of the cotton gin, which is just short for cotton engine, which was a device that separated out the little seeds and thorns and hard parts from cotton. And that was nice because then we didn't have to have people doing that, so we could create like weavable cotton at a much higher rate, again, leading to more money. But what happened is, since we have the cotton gin now, all the farmers in the South thought, oh, we'll start producing cotton. So that led everybody to need more slaves, and so slavery, like, I think quadrupled in the South during the early 1800s. So not good for slaves, good for Southern farmers. They were making a lot of money from this cotton. We also talk about nationalism, and yesterday, I think it was Olivia mentioned that nationalism is where you have a strong sense of national pride for your country, and you're focusing on the country's whole overall goals instead of just your own specific area. So that's nationalism versus sectionalism. Sectionalism is where, like, your particular section, you're mainly concerned with the area where you live specifically and its economy. We have something called the American system, which people still talk about today. This is a philosophy that was proposed by Henry Clay, who was one of our cabinet members during the, well, he later became president as well, but in this section, he wasn't quite president yet. But he worked a lot with our country's finances when Jackson was president. And so this American system that he proposed did a couple of things. It united our regions, the North and the South and the West, to be able to buy and sell with one another and trade. Before this time, we didn't have just one national currency. We had all different kinds of forms of money. We had silver, gold, we had like trading points that traders used to use. People would exchange things with Native Americans for, other goods instead of money. And so this made it really difficult to keep track of who was spending what, how much people were putting into the banks. We needed just like one kind of money that everybody would have, just like we do now. Bless you. So Clay created a national currency, or a dollar bill, basically, a system of bills and coins that everybody could use. The other big thing that's happening during this time is that since we're expanding westward, we have a whole new system of transportation, and the book mentions the Erie Canal, which basically just connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. So it was a quick passageway for people to get around, so that they didn't have to go all the way, down through the Panama Canal in Central America. They could just cut right over. And then the third thing that was done under this American system was to tax imports or products coming into our country from Great Britain to make them more expensive, and the idea behind that was that U.S. citizens would rather buy locally from within the U.S. because it was cheaper for them to do. And that was the government's plan in the first place. So it forced people to buy locally, as we say, right, within our own area, therefore not having to rely on Great Britain. We have something that foreshadowed the Civil War, which will be coming up in the next section, I believe. That was called the Missouri Compromise. And basically it was just, a compromise, a form of peace that we were able to come to eventually over whether or not these westward territories should allow slavery or not. It was a huge controversy at the time. And the southern states felt like the federal government had too much power over saying whether or not slavery should be legal. They thought that the individual states should be able to decide based on what their industry was like, based on what their needs were like. So what eventually happened was that Missouri, which was a brand new state at the time, was allowed to have slaves. Maine, which was another new state at the time, became a free state. And obviously Maine is way up north, so it makes sense that Maine would also be free, like the rest of the northern states. So anyway, this is just, this conflict between the North and the South over states' rights and over slavery, those are the main things that will lead to the Civil War eventually. So that's why the Missouri Compromise is something to note. Okay, good. Can I erase this? Everybody have the first board? Okay. Andrew Jackson was one of our most influential presidents, although he was influential in both positive and negative ways. So we'll talk about a few of those. His philosophy, which I see some people put down on their homework, is that the everyday common man and woman, well, man at the time, common man is really the strength or the backbone to America. And his philosophy made him really popular with the people. Before this time, presidents really, they didn't go out and speak to the general public like our presidents do now, because they were just being elected by a select few of people, usually the rich white guys, or the ones doing the electing. So now that more people are allowed to vote, the candidates for presidency think, oh, okay, I actually need to go out and get these people to like me because they're going to be voting for me. So even though Andrew Jackson was pretty wealthy himself, it's not like he grew up a farmer or anything like that, but he wanted to appeal to the masses, right, to the common man. And that's what a lot of politicians do, right? Well, I grew up on a farm myself. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. My mom was a single mother and blah, blah, you know, it's always the same spiel. They want people to think that they can relate, you know. And a lot of times they can. It's not always false, but it's a common political tactic, though, to watch out for. So anyway, this is his philosophy. And the year that Andrew Jackson was elected, he was running up against, who was it? John Quincy Adams. We'll put verses. Okay. So this election leads to the split of the Democrat-Republicans. It was thought that there was some weird kind of behind the scenes rigging going on with John Quincy Adams and other members of the federal government, and so the people got upset about this, obviously, and ended up voting for Jackson instead. But there was such a split between thinking here that they actually decided to split this one political party up into two, and it's still like that today. Obviously, we have the Democrats and the Republicans are our two major political parties. So, Henry Clay, the one who proposed the American system, he made it possible for John Quincy Adams to become president first for one term, but it was a little backhanded. He just used his power of government to kind of rig the election, so it wasn't really fair. But anyway, so Clay and Adams, Quincy Adams, were part of the Republican Party then. And then, oops, sorry, that should be one. And then Jackson and his followers, who were called Jacksonians, end up going into the Democratic Party. Let's see here. When Jackson was in office, he did something called rotations. In office that had to do with the people who are working for the government. Does anybody remember what rotation in office is? It explained it in the book. Maddie?
Does it, like, we still do it today, I think, when, like, people are elected at different times, so then it's not like the same group of people for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So typically, depending on who becomes president, the president has some authority over who he wants to have working as his cabinet, right? The general members of the federal government, the members of Congress. And the reason that they decided to do this is because you know, you never want the same group of people in Congress for a really long time because they can become jaded, corrupt. They can, you know, they just might not be able to come up with new ways of doing things. And also it's not really fair to either one of our major parties, right? We want to be able to kind of bounce back and forth and have the voices of everybody represented. So he started this idea that we would start bringing in new people and rotating them in and out of office just like we do with presidents and vice presidents. Okay, let's see. So we'll just put an extremely sad time in U.S. history was the whole process by which we removed Native Americans into the West and eventually off the grid entirely. I don't know what the exact number is, but there's a really small population of actual Native American people in the U.S. today because they were all either pushed out or killed off a lot during this time period, and then over the next couple of 100 years. So anyway, a couple of major ideas about this. We have what's called the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Because we had required all of this new territory now in the West, obviously U.S. residents want to settle it and build new lives there. So we have to push the Native Americans out. This Removal Act of 1830 specifically pushed the Cherokee Nation, which was one of the largest Native American groups. And we used military force to do it. So at first we tried bargaining and paying off the groups of Native Americans, but they didn't. That wasn't the point. They didn't want money. They just wanted to stay where they were. So we had to use military force, and so this led to something called the Trail of Tears. This was the long, hard journey on foot that the Cherokee tribe made out west to the Oregon Territory, which America had deemed like the Native American reservation. So this was an area where they could go, specifically designed for them. But again, they're still being pushed out of their homes. A lot of people died. is very violent. And there are a lot of documentaries and even museums specifically dedicated to just the Trail of Tears. I know Maddie said she visited a museum about this, so just the name of it is terrible to think about. Okay, the section talks a lot about tariffs or taxes being imposed on people, the states' rights versus the federal government's authority, and then the national bank. Something that Jackson did when he was in office is he didn't trust banks at all. And he thought that banks were really only there to make the rich more rich, and those people who were powerful more powerful. So he tried to dissolve the national bank, which was not a good move, because then what happened was that there was all this confusion about which money belonged to whom. A lot of people went bankrupt and lost their jobs. It was sort of like a Great Depression during the 1800s. So they really were trying to work out the banking system back then. And after he finished his term in office, his successor, the next president, Martin Van Buren, had to deal with cleaning up this bank crisis. And so everyone thought that Van Buren was a horrible president, but really it was Jackson's fault, which happens a lot during presidencies. If something bad happens while a president is in office and then he leaves, whoever has to come in and deal with it gets a bad legacy as well. So one of the joys of being president, I suppose. Okay, we had what was called the nullification crisis. And this was just an argument over states' rights and federal authority. On the topic of taxes specifically. So whenever you nullify something, what does that mean? We say we're going to nullify this law or this bill. A nullify just means that you're ignoring it. To you, that law doesn't exist. You're saying that it's unconstitutional, it shouldn't be there, it's unfair. So some of these states in the South, I think it was South Carolina specifically, was upset about a tax that was ruining their economy, their agricultural economy. And so they said this law that you've put into place is unconstitutional, we should be allowed to do what we want here. So they decided to nullify it or pretend like it didn't exist. So this obviously sparked a crisis with the federal government, and it's a long, hairy ordeal, but that was the basic gist of it. So again, we have another crisis where the states are fighting with each other, which isn't good because that can always lead to civil war. And it does eventually. Let's see here. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about one more thing and then we'll be finished. We have William Henry Harrison, who was president after Martin Van Buren. He was a member of the Whig Party, which I always think is funny. Who were the Whigs, and why did they come up with this separate party? Remembers. It was probably one of your terms that you had to identify. You didn't have to, okay. Well, the Whig Party, what happened is that when Jackson decided to try to get rid of the banking system in America, he had these groups who thought that he was like trying to act like a king. He was trying to use too much power, and so they started calling him King Jackson I, like making fun of him. And so these opposers to Jackson decided that they were going to take on this new name of the Whig Party. And the Whigs were a group over in Europe who tried to eliminate like king's power, basically, royal power. So now we have this whole other group. So now we have the Whigs as a separate political group, and then we have the Democrats. So, you know, these political parties come and go. Obviously, we don't have the Whig Party anymore. King threat is not a real threat to us anymore since we don't have to worry about it. And most developed nations don't have kings anymore anyway, that's the whole point, so. But anyway, so that's what the Whigs were about. The Whigs wanted more powerful for the people instead of having like one person who was reigning supreme over everything. So, okay, good, let's see here. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. Let's look at question 3, which you had to answer for the homework today. It says, in what ways do you think the Missouri Compromise and the nullification crisis might be considered important milestones in American history before the Civil War? Use evidence in the text to support your response. And it says, think about the expansion of slavery into the West, Calhoun's nullification theory, and Thomas Jefferson's ideas about slavery and the Union. What did you put? I know I mentioned a couple of things, but it looked like everybody had good answers to that. Yeah, Holly?
For the nullification crisis, since it required because the South was not making money, so they had to buy, support the North economy. So I think that might have caused some tension in
Yeah.
the South.
Yeah, absolutely. The South felt like they were getting the short end of the stick. The North was making all this money, the South was working still, but they couldn't get equal trade out of it, basically. Good. Other ideas? Yeah, Maddie?
I have like the Missouri Compromise kind of split the nation into like Maine was a northern state and that was a free state, and the Missouri is kind of southern, so it just split the nation even more.
Yeah, definitely. So we have states' rights versus in the North was considered the Union, right? And those were most of the first states. But like Indiana was a free state. We didn't allow slavery, so we were considered a northern state. Excuse me. So yeah, it was an argument between whether we should have slavery, whether we shouldn't. Okay, states' rights, the economy and industry, and how we would balance those all throughout the country. Okay, good. Anything else? Okay. Good. Do you have any questions about this section? There's a lot that happened, I know. There's a lot of little details, a lot of people mentioned. People who would become presidents, that's why they're in here. I was driving downtown yesterday, and I noticed, this wasn't the first time I noticed this, but I don't know if you've ever realized, but all of our main roads downtown are all named after presidents. Have you realized this? Yeah. I was looking, Washington, Calhoun, Clay, Jefferson, all of So around town we have a lot of streets named after presidents. It's kind of funny, specifically downtown.